Me. Is that working? Welcome back to CTRL C. In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up the general parameters of the WAGO PFC products, including things like flashing a new firmware, setting up the static IP address, turning ports and different services on and off. For this demonstration, I'm using a WAGO PFC 200. It'll work just the same for a PFC 100. To flash the firmware, you're going to need an SD card. Depending on the PFC, will determine the size, whether it's a mini or micro. For the PFC 200, it's just a mini SD. Micro for the PFC 100. And there's also a process for setting a temporary static IP, which I'll step through as well. Let's get started. The first process that we're going to do is flash the firmware to the SD card. So I've just got a standard micro SD card and a mini SD card adapter, which I'll use for my PFC 200. I'm going to insert my SD card into a card reader, and I'm actually going to connect this to Windows. We can ignore all these warnings. We're going to use a software called Win32 Disk Imager. When I open this up, you'll see that it automatically will select the removable media, drive E, which is my SD card. Now I just need to select my firmware file. So this firmware file I got from WAGO support, my local WAGO support person, and I've got multiple versions of this. If I go to where I downloaded and extracted this, firmware 10 is the most current firmware as of July 2017. So I'm going to select this firmware 10 .img file. I'll open this, and then I'll write it to my SD card. You'll get a warning telling you that it's going to overwrite anything on the card. We can just click OK. Okay, once that's complete, we'll click OK, and we can exit out of here and remove our SD card. Now that we have our firmware on our SD card, we will plug it into the PFC 200, and we'll power it up. Now, on original power up, it's going to look for DHCP server to get its IP address. This is the default setting. For our intent, we're going to set a static IP, a temporary static IP, so that we can connect to it with our computer. It's often the case in the field that you don't have a switch that's going to assign the DHCP, so it's good to know how to get around that. You'll see that we have the PFC in stop. If your PFC is not in stop, you want to put it that way. And then we're going to hold down this reset switch for 8 seconds. And we'll see that system light start flashing orange. That means that we have a static IP temporarily set. Okay, so now that we have the temporary static IP set, we want to go set a permanent one. If you pull up a web browser, you'll want to go to 192.168.1.17. That's going to be the default IP address now of the PLC. What we'll want to do now is just make sure that we set a permanent static IP. So if we navigate here to networking and we go to TCP IP, we'll be asked to enter our admin credentials. You can find all these in the manual. Select static IP. We'll leave this as 192.168.1.17 and we'll submit. Now this is going to set the static IP now for the PLC. We could reboot it, which might be a good idea at this point. But before we do that, I would like to show you how to copy the firmware from the SD card to the PLC. So we're going to go down to Administration, and we're going to select Create Image. And once I've selected Create Image, Since the firmware right now is booting off of the SD card, it's going to know which direction you'll want to write this. So create a bootable image from the active partition, which is the memory card, and the destination is internal flash. So we've already put our admin credentials in here. We're going to just start copy. And what this is going to do is this is going to actually copy the firmware from the SD card to the PFC 200. Now we can power off the PFC, remove the SD card, and reapply power. Now once this has come back up, we can go back to the web-based management just by typing in the IP address, and we can just navigate around some of the services that are available here. Under PLC runtime, if you're using the PFC 200, you'll have multiple choices for the PLC runtime. If this is the PFC 100, it will default to E runtime, but you also have the option of turning the runtime off. In the PFC 200's case, you've got Code Assist 2 target on there as well, so you'll have to select this. You can also select the web visual and where it boots. So a lot of this will be will require just web-based management, but if you'd like for it to boot directly into the web visual, that's an option as well. Under networking, there are definitely more options than just setting the IP address. You can change the host name, the domain name. Again, set the static IP, and in this case, you can separate the gateways, which is a nice option. Under the Ethernet option, you can separate the ports and have both X1, X2 have separate IP addresses and really separate networks completely. The firewall configuration allows each port, depending on if it's switched or separated, to turn on and off services. So this is nice when you need to secure your PLC to block against maybe Modbus, Modbus hole from one side to the other. You can separate these ports, which becomes really handy. Let's say one of those needs to have access to FTP, but you don't want that to be outside of the firewall. You can do that as well. Quite a few. I won't go through each of these, but it is also nice if you come down to ports and services. You've got several network services that can be turned on and off. By default, it's going to have HTTPS enabled. You may never reach to the outside internet, so HTTP might be suitable, and definitely less work to have to use this. PLC runtime services as well. You can turn the web server and the web visual on and off, enable, disable that. You can also enable, disable port authentication. So I encourage you to look through these menus to see what services you might be using. Some other neat tools, there's a VPN client that you can use with this. So if you're using a VPN server, you can point this to your VPN server and pull this onto your VPN network, which means you can program, make use of the web visualizations and all that locally on your machine, even if this is remote. So hopefully that gave you at least the beginning overview of how to set up your PFC in order to start working with it. Often setting a static IP is really all you need to get started, but it's nice to know about some of those other services as well. And you always want to make sure that you're running the most current firmware, because there are security patches and other things. A lot of those services can also be handled by the Linux environment, which I hope to cover in a later video. But hopefully this got you started. Any questions, please post them in the comments, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.